Well, this is going to be an interesting topic for all of those, all of your companies that are working with remote workers. I'm just going to jump right in. This is, so you're listening to the Human Resource, and this is a show of solutions. And I am talking to companies every week they're hiring what they consider to be the best talent available, and now they have the entire country to choose from. But what they're lacking in understanding is around all the different things that shift and change when you've got someone in another state. Or what shifts and changes when you hire someone in a municipality who has their own laws around employment different than where your corporate office is. My name's Pandy, and I'm a consultant here in the Cincinnati market. I've been in HR for over 40 years, and years ago, I began to see this shift and change in regards to the speed of decisions that the states were starting to make, and the importance of understanding these differences, because if what starts in California tends to flow across the country and start being picked up by other states like Colorado, New York, Illinois, Massachusetts. And I've got companies that are located only in North Carolina, or they're located in Wisconsin, or their corporate offices are not here in Ohio. And I knew it was going to be an absolute necessity to understand the differences in these state laws. But now I'm realizing that I have to make it an absolute priority to help you, the individuals who are in HR, to understand that you cannot start bringing all these remote workers in and think that you can use the laws or the rules or the guidelines, the policies that you've been using in your state of residence for them. Some you can, absolutely. Some you can. But I actually just jotted down about 12 that I really want to go over so that you're going back to your office and saying, hey, I never thought about it, but are we really allowed to pay once a month versus bi-weekly, bi-monthly? So here's your list. And let's start with paydays. It's interesting, even though I'm here in Ohio, and Ohio's law, Ohio Revised Code says, hey, you can have one payday. Now remember, there's a difference between work week and pay period, but you can have one payday as long as you're paying within a 30-day period or 31-day period of when the individual worked. But Kentucky, that law is different. They say they need to be paid every 2 weeks, or at least in a more rapid period. You can't pay on a monthly basis if you're paying an individual in Kentucky. So my challenge is, what do the states require for your remote workers? And then that's what you have to abide by. Some of you may have to make a big change. And remember, when we're talking about all these differences, plausible deniability is not going to work. It is your responsibility to research and find out these specific laws. Then what about paying them on their last day of employment? If an individual terminates in a state outside of Ohio, do I have to have a check for them at that moment? Can I pay them in the next pay period? Some states require within a 15-day period. Some states require within the next pay period that's standard for the company. Some say no. If that individual is leaving involuntarily, you have to have a check for them on the spot. You have to pay them for all hours worked there on the spot, anything that you owe them. Maybe that includes some PTO, who knows? But definitely look into that, because each state now is starting to get wage theft laws. Now, let me be specific on that. These are guidelines, state specific, that determine whether you're paying that employee correctly. Now, I know, there are all those federal laws around wage and hour, Fair Labor Standard Act. Yes, IRS, gauge and oversee how we pay people, but the states are now adding on top of that wage theft laws. And you don't want to be caught not paying somebody correctly from a timing perspective. I know it gets a little complicated, but then let's go into, how about, do we pay PTO out? Remember, California says they never lose PTO or vacation or any such benefit because it's truly a part of their compensation. They can keep it for the duration of their employment. But have you checked to see what the other states are doing based on where your remote workers are? And many of the states will allow companies to have a specific policy saying, no, any unused vacation or PTO is not paid out. And if that's the case, if you have an employee in a state that allows that, do you have the proper language in your PTO policy or your termination policy? Check it out. We all remember ban the box, and that's almost nationwide. But double check, because there still are a couple states that are holding out, and you are permitted to ask if the individual has had a felony prior to an offer. I would definitely check it out, because you don't want to make that mistake. That could be a claim of discrimination if you're not handling that correctly. Another big topic is salary history. There are all sorts of conversation among the different states, and now even some of the municipalities here in Ohio, Toledo, Cincinnati. Employers within those jurisdictions are not permitted to ask the salary history of candidates applying for their jobs. And yet Ohio doesn't care. If you're in Dayton, if you're in Cleveland, you can ask. So be very specific in narrowing down. And remember, when you're posting on a big job board like Indeed or ZipRecruiter or one of these places where they just do a major blast of your posting, you've got to make sure that the individuals screening those candidates who are gathering the initial information from those individuals applying understand that they need to pay attention to where that candidate's coming from. Salary history, ban the box, that all may apply. And remember, that's all stuff that we're trying to find out in the applicant process. So be very, very careful. But as we're talking about the applicant process, we also have pay transparency. What I mean by that is, if you haven't heard, a number of states are requiring that you post and make available job pay ranges. So if you're going to post a position in Colorado, or if you're going to be talking to a candidate in Colorado, you need to have that pay range already established. You don't want to be shooting from the hip on this thing, because what you say may not be the same as any individual or other individual in the interviewing process. Pay transparency is going to be a big conversation, because we got away from it here a few years ago, 10, 20 years ago. Prior, it was standard. There were pay ranges, there were job grades, everything was very rigid. And then we started to get away with it. People started getting very fluid with pay ranges, and we're going right back to full awareness. Some states require that you have it available within a 30-day period of the offer being made. Some states want it so that it's just available by request at any time. Either way, find out what the pay transparency laws are for your candidates as well as employees. Another topic that I really want you to be aware of and be knowledgeable on is, what about the marijuana topic? And this has several angles to be considering. Some states are taking the approach that you can't even test for marijuana in a pre-employment drug test. Some states are saying, hey, if it's involving medical marijuana, You don't have to hire them. You can ask that right up in the applicant process. You don't have to hire them. Workers' comp's not going to cover it, especially here in Ohio. How about recreational marijuana? Are you permitted to ask or check employees under reasonable suspicion? And what do you do in terms of an employment decision after that in some states? Marijuana is a very volatile conversation because states are still putting this on the ballot. So even if you check tomorrow where your remote workers are, you need to give yourself a tickler to be checking this again in another at least 9 months to a year. And then I always go back to the non-competes and non-solicitations. Guys, this topic is when you see the federal government getting involved in something that the states have traditionally and constitutionally been able to oversee and control, you know you've got a situation where there's going to be even more change coming. So if your non-compete, non-solicitation, I'm not talking about your confidentiality statement, I'm talking non-compete, non-solicitation agreement. If it has not been reviewed in the past 6 months, please get that in front of your labor law attorney. This is not something a consultant should be advising you on. This is serious. Go straight to your labor law attorney and tell him, hey, I've got employees in each of these states. This is the position. They're going to want to know the position the individual's in, the salary of that individual, and when you hired them. Your labor law attorney may look at you and say, you're great, you're fine. Or she may look at you and say, no, I need to do a separate non-compete, non-solicitation for each one of your states. And I've got one client right now that's working off of 5 different formats because of the states that his employees are working in. I've talked about this before. There are some documents that have to be done from a legal perspective. That's one of them. How about reporting workers' comp? Because some states are state-sponsored, like Ohio, and then other states are, you get an insurance policy and it's all taken care of on the outside basis, you really need to be aware of the reporting process and the procedures for reporting a workplace accident or incident. I've got one state that's requiring to be notified within 3 days. I've got another state that wants it done on a specific form. You have to have it in within a month, and it's all over the gambit, guys. So go back to your brokers, go back to the state if you have a state-sponsored fund, and find out what's the proper format to be using and what's the timing. Remember, those workers' comp certificates all have to be sent out to your remote workers on verifying that you have a plan per state. So if you haven't done that, make sure that you're sending that certificate out to each of your remote workers. I also noticed here recently that there's even different approaches to reimbursements. I know it's just a topic we don't really think about, but did you know that each of the states either have no statement on this or they have very specific guidelines on what expenses are required to be reimbursed to the employee, how they're to be reimbursed, and the timing of that reimbursement. This one's slipping between the cracks on a lot of individuals because, again, with remote workers, they may be buying supplies for their office, they may be traveling on behalf of the company. There are all sorts of business expenses that have come out of this remote work, and some of these states are getting very, very distinctive and very vocal about how they want those reimbursements established and distributed. So put that on your list as something you need to be looking at. And then the big one, and I left this for the end. Please check the state of residence for your remote workers on how they define and handle terminations. New York City is now looking at eliminating at-will employment and they're talking wrongful discharge. Guys, if that starts spreading across the country, and if there are guidelines by which employers have to start following on reporting and specifically going about the process of terminating somebody, I mean, I'm going above the WARN Act, okay? We're going way above the WARN Act where you have to report if you're going to terminate 50 or more employees. We're going beyond that. We're talking about the smaller organizations that never really had to worry about anything outside of at-will employment. Please check into this. Or do what I've always told you to do, and that's let us know if you have a question. You see, this stuff is it's constantly moving, and remote work is not going away. So if you don't have a good HR consultant, go to your labor law attorney. And if you don't quite want to get the heavy hitters in, you can always contact us, because we'll be more than happy to help you here at the Human Resource.